All right, welcome back to the BAASS Connect Virtual. This is part 2 on the norming asset management solution. We completed the asset accounting in our first session today, and in our second norming asset management session, we'll be covering the asset maintenance module. Just as a quick review in case you missed the first session, asset management is an SDK-based fixed asset solution written exclusively for Sage 300 that starts off with a core accounting module that allows you to acquire, depreciate, adjust, and dispose of your fixed assets, generates your depreciation reports and your fixed asset schedules. And optionally, then you can add in a leasing module for tracking your leases into the organization from a vendor or out to a customer, and generates the appropriate AP or AR invoice for billing purposes. There's also a tracking module for recording barcodes and tracking the movement of assets and doing physical counts. And the topic for this session is the asset maintenance module, which allows you to keep track of the costs to keep your assets in productive service. So as I mentioned, asset accounting is a required module in order for you to run asset maintenance, because the whole purpose of this module is to allow you to create a profile against your fixed assets in the asset accounting ledger that allows you to then attach the criteria for tracking and recording maintenance expenses against the assets that have been set up for accounting purposes in your asset register. To do that, we'll take a look at a couple of different profiles for some of the assets that we've set up in the system. So for example, if we have a mining crusher, we have a lot of companies in the mining industry, there are a number of ways that we can create profiles around the use of these assets. One of the approaches is to use metering. And by metering, we're saying that we want to keep track of the usage of the asset, determine what 100% capacity for that asset is, and then use meter readings as a way of measuring how much of that asset we're consuming or using. And based on that metering, we will establish a threshold at which we're going to create a new maintenance work order. So instead of basing the maintenance order on time periods, we base it on the usage of the asset, and we assign resources that determine the kinds of expenses we're going to incur every time we generate a maintenance work order. So in this case, we're going to be consuming parts from our spare parts inventory, which will create an inventory transaction. And in this case, it's a service, labor service from an outside vendor, $18.90. So we're going to be generating an AP invoice to record those expenses as opposed to issuing IC stock. So based on the usage of the asset, and in this case, we're saying every 100 hours is our unit of measure. And then we keep statistics on, as we're consuming those hours, what's our average reading been, our average usage per day, what was the last reading for that meter, and so far, what is our total usage versus what our initial capacity was, and therefore it'll tell us what our remaining capacity is, both in the unit of measure, in this case hours, as well as the remaining capacity on a percentage basis. And as we record meter readings, we will give you a history of how often we've been reading those meters and when a maintenance work order was created. And then for the profile purposes, when we go back to the main history page, we're seeing how much money has been spent year to date versus life to date, and how many times have we generated maintenance work orders, and when we did those, what was the highest incidence of one maintenance work order. So all of these statistics are keeping track of our costs to keep the assets in productive service, linking directly to the accounting system in Sage 300 as we generate the various types of transactions. So we can create AP invoices, we can create inventory usage, internal usage when we consume spare parts, and we can also incur general ledger entries. We do support optional fields, and we also support service level agreements if you want to create those against the vendor activities that are being procured for the purpose of maintaining our assets. So this is an example of one asset that is using a meter in order to determine when to do maintenance work orders. We have other assets in the system that we might want to use different types of transactions. So in this case, we've got meters based on mileage. So in one case, we had a time meter. In this case, we have a mileage meter. And again, we're going to be assuming what 100% capacity is and linking that to different resources. And those resources will determine the kind of parts that are going to be consumed when we generate a work order. Now, all of these parts will appear on the maintenance work order, but it's going to be our choice as to which ones we actually consume on any particular work order. And again, we will show the history of every time we've done the meter reading. So we'll go through a couple of different examples of how we can generate maintenance work orders within the system. But before we do that, let me go back and explain a little bit more detail on these resources, because the resources determine how we're costing our maintenance work orders. So you can see here that in some cases we have a service level agreement where we have to issue a purchase requisition in order to procure the services of an outside vendor, and we can have a default vendor, or we could leave that blank and enter the vendor based on who we're procuring those agreements with. Usually in the case where we have a service level agreement, it's going to be established as a periodic agreement that might last for 6 months or 12 months. So those are one type of resource. Another one is where we're using an outside vendor as well, but instead of a service level agreement, it might just be a hotline for support service, and we create an AP invoice every time we have to procure those services. And we might have a cost per hour that they're going to charge us whenever we do that hotline support service. In other cases, we might be issuing IC stock because it's based on consuming spare parts inventory. So in this case, it's going to generate an internal usage transaction within Sage 300. And in other cases, we might be generating a GL transaction, which will hit the repairs and maintenance expense and offset it against payable clearing for wages payable because it's internal labor. So we have parts, labor, and miscellaneous cost classes that we can track, and there might be an internal hourly charge that we want to charge to the maintenance work order for the work that's being done. Now, the meter types are when we want to determine the maintenance work orders based on consumption, and you can create as many different meter types as you want, and then notice that they can be tied to a schedule code. Let me explain that in a little more detail. In addition to consuming the usage of the asset based on meter readings, we have a meter reading processing option where we can determine of all of the types of assets that we're tracking meters against. As we update those meters, when we cross over the threshold, we'll create maintenance work orders. But we also have the ability to create maintenance work orders based on a time series. So you can determine either monthly or annual fixed periods in which we are going to assume that maintenance work orders need to be produced. And then this could be tied to either warranty work that needs to get done. So in the case, there might be other compliance procedures for inspections to meet certain safety board regulations. So certain assets might fall under that, where we have to do a monthly inspection. Others, it might be inspections to comply with the warranty on a particular vehicle. And so we're going to make sure that those warranty inspections get done and are documented, going through a maintenance schedule, which is based on a schedule code. The schedule code comes from the schedules capability that's built into Sage 300 as one of the common services. So when you use the schedule code, you can specify recurring maintenance work orders that need to get done on a periodic basis. And you can also schedule reminders to do the meter readings for those assets that are being maintained based on consumption statistics for the usage of the asset. And then the third way that we can generate work orders, so the first one was based on consumption or usage of the asset. The second one is just based on a period of time. The third one is just to go in and do an ad hoc maintenance work order. So it might be an emergency repair that's required. And so rather than waiting for the end of the month or waiting for consumption statistics to come in, you might have an emergency repair. And so you'll just go in and create an ad hoc work order, choose the asset, if vendor services are required, any supporting documentation, and any optional field information that you want to include with that maintenance work order. And in any case, for all types of maintenance work orders, it will specify an order date and then a due date for when that maintenance needs to get done. And then when you hit the start button, it will enter the start date. And when you're ready to complete the order, you'll put in a closed date. It is possible to take an existing maintenance work order and copy it. So if you've got a maintenance work order template for maintenance work that needs to get done on a regular basis, instead of creating a new order ad hoc every time, you could just copy that template and reuse it as often as you like. So those are the three basic ways to generate your maintenance work orders. Now, as I mentioned, we use the scheduling tool within Sage 300 so that as you create different types of maintenance work orders, these details could be linked to the recurring maintenance work orders that we talked about, but they might also be based on a monthly schedule where you determine that every month on the first day, you're going to generate a reminder and be able to create a recurring maintenance work order that way. And this is very similar to the schedule that you might create for recurring entries within GL or AP. So it's tied in directly to an existing function within Sage 300 so that you can leverage what's already built to use the monthly schedules and the reminder lists within Sage 300. So in here, it might pop up the fact that you need to do a semi-annual maintenance check when you log into Sage 300. And when you click on the schedule, it will show you it's semi-annual, and the details will explain what kind of maintenance work orders might need to be created. And by hitting the process button, it would go in and create maintenance work orders for you. Now you can see that it was already processed. So in this case, it's not going to duplicate the order for you if that schedule has already been processed and those maintenance work orders. But the reminder might come up that they have been generated, and now it's time for you to notify someone else in the organization to start to work on those work orders. So we've got the setup options, the equipment profile, and then you can set up the vendors that you're going to procure services from. And in some cases, you'll actually have service level agreements that are assigned to those vendors, and the details around those service level agreements, such as the response period that's normal, the effective date, the expiry date, any special details, if there's a notification when that service level agreement has to be renewed. In this case, it's based on a yearly schedule code, so there'll be a reminder for you to update that at the end of the year or so many days in advance of the expiration date. And you can set up contact details for the vendor, the equipment that is being worked on under that service level agreement, and the resources that are being consumed, any documentation, and then the totals for the SLA price for the contract. So now let's go ahead and work on a couple of these different types of maintenance work orders so you can see how these work. So if I use the meter reading processing, and I want to use a couple of different meter types, I could use either the kilometer meters, I could use the time meter, which is this one here. So if we use that range, and we choose the equipment, and we can say we want to reset for a particular date and time. So let's move ahead here to, we'll use a December time frame. And let's say as of December the 4th, last Friday. And it will know which assets need to be updated for the meter readings. And if we take a look at, let's use this concrete truck for kilometers. And let's say that our capacity is 100,000 kilometers. And we want to put in a reading of, let's say, 11,000 kilometers. So we'll update the kilometer reading for the concrete truck. And then let's say the new equipment here, the time meter, the last reading, well, we have capacity of 10,000. So let's say this reading is 25,000. And let's go ahead and process. And based on those meter readings, it may find some documents that need to be updated and produce maintenance work orders. So now, based on those maintenance work orders, you will see that certain documents get created automatically. So if we go to the maintenance work orders, you'll see some are based on meter readings. So this one here, work order 67, was a meter reading generated maintenance requirement for this bus. And it's got a listing of all the items that are required. If there's a vendor attached to that for services, any supporting documentation, and a history of what's been done already. Also, optional fields can be set so that you want to track project manager approvals. So you would see any values attached to those optional fields. Now, in the case where we had items that had to create a purchase requisition, we could create the purchase requisition off the maintenance work order once it's created. So that's one type of order. Another type of order where we want to generate AP invoices. So there's order here 60. This was a time-based maintenance work order, which was a monthly inspection of trucks, heating and cooling units. And so there's different assets that are assigned here, some of which are going to be consuming services from an outside vendor. Others are going to be consuming spare parts again. So if we go to the maintenance entry, we will see how these transactions get entered and then posted to update Sage 300. So we have an open batch here that we'll start with. Now in the case, let's just say this is maintenance work for the month. And we're going to create a GL entry against that work order 67 that we saw, which was a meter reading generated order. So it knows the asset and the resources that are being consumed. So we can go in and say that, well, for the 5-gallon oil, we consumed one of those. And the oil filter, let's say we needed 3 of those because we've got a few different filters, and then 4 tires that had to be consumed. And it will record the maintenance expense as we draw those items out of inventory. Or we could say the unit cost on that item was $150 for the oil. The 3 filters were $250. And in this case, let's say it was $600 or 6,000. Sorry, we want 600. And we would add those as details on the system. And you notice that there's a value for maintenance entries optional field, repair. So the system is going to tell us that we have to put in a value for this repair. Is this emergency, regular scheduled, or maybe it's warranty? We could say this is regularly scheduled maintenance, and add that. So that's how the optional fields can work for you. You add some additional information. Now in this case, instead of GL, let's do an AP invoice type entry. So this is a vendor service maintenance work. And we would choose a vendor. So if we chose 1890, there's some assets that need to be repaired on maintenance work order number 60, which was the monthly inspection. Those were tied to service level agreements, and so there are hotline service and repair that need to be done for these. And there's a unit cost that's been assigned, and let's say in this case they needed 2 hours, and in this case they needed 3 hours. So we have the cost that's been assigned, and it's going to the repairs and maintenance expense account. So the optional field here is repair category. And in this case, we can say this is a warranty repair covered by the supplier. And so we're charging that back. So that's another entry that we can save in the system. And then a third one, let's say that this is spare parts maintenance work. So this will be an inventory type transaction. And in this case, let's choose an order 63, which was an emergency oil replacement on the dump truck. And we're going to need to consume some oil. So in this case, we just need to track the quantity, and let's say it was 5 gallons. The unit cost shows a 0 because we're going to pick up that cost when we post the inventory transaction and run day end. Now in here, there's also an optional field, and because this was highlighted as an emergency repair, we're going to flag that as an emergency, and then using the optional field, we can always sort for emergency repair work that was required. So now we've got those maintenance entries recorded, and we can go ahead and post that maintenance batch. And once we post that maintenance batch, so there was 3 open, let's go ahead and post. We will see that a GL entry gets created, an AP invoice gets created, and an IC internal usage gets created. And there's the GL. So we have an AP invoice created, an internal usage created, and a GL transaction created. So all 3 types of entries have been created. So let's go up to the GL, and we look at our transactions and open up the batch list. And so down below here, we see a transaction batch that has been created for going to repairs and maintenance expense. That was maintenance work for the month. And you can drill from these GL entries back to the work order, which I believe in this case was 67. Yes, this was the work order 67, which was consuming the parts that we wanted to pull, but they were GL entries because they weren't part of the inventory, and this was just regularly scheduled maintenance. So that has updated transactions that hit the repairs and maintenance expense account in the GL, and it's flagged as an AM maintenance batch. So that's one of the entries. Now there was also a transaction retrieved from IC. So this was internal usage where we were consuming the oil. And so it debits the internal usage and credits inventory for the transaction for the consumption of that inventory. And if we drill here, this was the maintenance reference for the use of the 5 gallons of oil, an IC internal usage. And then within accounts payable, we will have a transaction that was created for the maintenance work that was procured from an outside vendor. So this is shown as an asset management generated batch, similar to what happened when we created the acquisition batch for the new asset. And again, we're hitting repairs and maintenance as the expense account to offset the payable. And the description gives us the asset ID numbers of the assets that maintenance work was done on. And again, there's a drill down from AP back to the maintenance accounting or the asset maintenance module so that we can see the details around the assets that were worked on. So this was maintenance work order 60, and it was the type of work that was required for our warranty repairs. So all of that information is recorded as part of a maintenance work order, and then it updates into Sage 300 financial accounting modules when we post the maintenance batch. So when we look at some of the maintenance reports, maintenance history is an important one because we're getting a chance to run reports by equipment or resource code as of a certain period. So if we go back, let's say to 2018, we can print our maintenance history report, see what kind of work's being done and the costs being incurred to keep our assets in productive service. So there's the equipment code and the maintenance work orders and the quantity. In this case, they were vendor activities with a source amount, a functional amount, so it is fully multi-currency as well. And it's just listing out the work that's being done against all the assets. So for each asset, there will be resources that are consumed. As you look at the maintenance history report, it's going to be showing you the type of work that's being done and the costs being incurred. So that's one type of maintenance report called the maintenance history report. There's also a report that will give you a maintenance schedule. So if you're planning for your maintenance in advance, your regular maintenance, you can see from the different types of codes, whether it's the monthly or the annual maintenance or all of them. You could select, let's say we just want to take a look at our fixed asset inspections and see what's being scheduled and get a sense of the type of work that's flowing through the shop for maintenance work that's coming through. So you can see the equipment that needs to be worked on, the kind of work. There's the optional field for the repair service that's being done. Notice that you can assign budget information as well, and then it tells you the kind of accounting entries that will be created. In this case, AP invoice is the type of work that's done for our fixed asset annual maintenance. That's one type of maintenance work that we're recording. Another one might be the monthly inspections. So we could break that out separately for the monthly inspections and run the maintenance schedule, including the optional fields here as well. And so here we see the type of equipment that's being done, and it's mostly inspection work, and the work that's being done is being budgeted, and the type of hours we're anticipating, and that the notes must document inspections is all in here, and the optional fields for the people that are involved is part of this report as well. So this is how we would track maintenance expenses within the asset maintenance module, and it gives you a view of how you're doing in terms of keeping your assets in productive service. And as these transactions are being updated, it's going to update the profile for your fixed assets that you've set up for maintenance purposes. And as we start recording these transactions against these assets, you will start to see the costs and statistics increasing, because now for this, it's over $17,000, and there's 5 maintenance work orders that have been generated. When we started the presentation, this was around 16,004 maintenance counts. So it's going to be accumulating this information for you to keep track of your maintenance expenses. And so you have a quick snapshot of what it's costing you to keep these assets in productive service. So that's the end of the asset maintenance presentation. We hope you enjoyed that. And if you do have any questions, please post them in the chat. But for now, we want to thank you for attending, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much.